We're back, of course, talking some FF7. We got some more interviews with our boy Naoki Hamaguchi. My God, he does not stop doing interviews. Shout out to him, by the way. Is awesome. Like, he's definitely somebody that seems to be like for the people, for the community, right? Regardless of what you think about, aspects of the remake games or whatever. But like, he's done most, if not all, of these interviews at Tokyo Game Show or kind of around Tokyo Game Show time, right? And there's a lot of them. We've looked at like 10 or so articles on this channel in the last like couple of videos. There's like 3 more like I pulled up right now. There's also like several video interviews out there that we've not even looked at all. I will say from the video interviews that I've seen, there wasn't anything super interesting or worth talking about other than with the Easy Allies interview they did very recently. There was like one part where he talks about like using the remake combat mechanics and maybe in another game at some point potentially. And actually looking at these articles, the Simulation Daily interview is just like an article kind of sort of covering the interview, but it actually links to a YouTube video. There wasn't anything like super interesting from that either, other than Hamaguchi talking about Part 3 news or whatever. We'll just use Shinra Arc's coverage of it. They say, Naoki Hamaguchi says to please give them a bit more time until they can announce more for Part 3. He's pretty confident with how the third title is turning up right now, so he hopes fans look forward to it. Assume they mean to say how Part 3 is turning out, because turning up means something else entirely. But yeah, more teasing of, Part 3 information. It's cool. It was a little more exciting when we were first kind of hearing that. Now we're kind of hearing it all the time. And every other interview at this point, right, that we're going to talk about the game soon. It's like, okay. And he did most, if not all, these interviews kind of around the same time. So it's fine that he said this a lot. It's just like, okay, now I just want to get to like the actual information, right? Now we're hopping into the GameDeveloper.com interview. So he says, we want to keep the players' interest in our game, but in order to do that, we can't simply just add new elements. That won't be enough. We want to add a new interpretation to the story, entirely new story elements, things like that to, again, sustain the player interest and have players look forward and be curious to the conclusion of the remake trilogy. I thought that was kind of interesting just because with like the last video, we talked about, the reimagining of the story. That's a term we've used. We've also used the phrase or term reinterpretation of the story, right? We've used that a lot in videos in the past. And it's kind of interesting to hear Hamaguchi himself say it this time, that the remake trilogy is a reinterpretation of the original FF7 story. Which is pretty much what they've been saying for the last couple of years, and really probably all of the remake's marketing cycle and stuff is, it's a reimagining, a reinterpretation, a modern interpretation of the FF7 story, right? Again, I'm not trying to argue theory stuff here. I'm not trying to convince you 100% that sequel stuff's not happening. It's just that we've been hearing this a lot lately from Hamaguchi. Reimagining of the story, reinterpretation of the story. Everybody's going to believe what they want, right? I'm not here to argue about this shit. I really don't care that much at the end of the day. I'm still going to buy Part 3 and enjoy it for whatever it is, whatever the story they present. We all have our thoughts on it. I'm just covering what's being said in interviews. Obviously, when we look at Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, I think a lot of users were interested to find out what's going to happen to Aerith and her fate. So because of that, we tried to create a game and depict the story in a way where players won't be able to tell what's going to happen to Aerith until the very end. So this is the weird part of the marketing for me when it comes to Rebirth. Like, leading up to Rebirth, post-Rebirth interviews and stuff, they always want to talk about Aerith's fate and what's going on with Aerith. But the problem is, half the time, you have people like Katase, I think more specifically, just straight up tells you that Aerith is dead, that Cloud can't accept her, he's ignoring it, he doesn't want to accept the fact that Aerith is dead, he's living in a delusional existence, right? And then also, like, you have, like, Cody Christian, I think it was, who straight up told us that Cloud says the iconic lines from the original game after Aerith's death, right? His eyes burning, mouth is dry, that whole thing, right? Aerith's line has been recorded. Cody recorded that line, which is something he only says if Aerith fucking dies. Like, we've been told more or less directly that Aerith is dead. So this marketing they do of, like, what is Aerith's fate is just so strange to me because it doesn't make any sense. Also, prior to this quote in this interview from Hamaguchi, he talks about how there's aspects of the original game that they obviously wanted to alter or change, and then there's a lot of things from the original game that they didn't want to change at all, right? They want to keep exactly the same. When working on a remake, Hamaguchi said he first tries to think about what the original players have in mind. In this case, what they loved about Final Fantasy VII. There are parts he didn't want to alter or change and decided to keep as is, but there were others that the team wanted to create something new for the modern generation of players. Still, there are clear expectations in mind, which the team took into consideration to preserve that interest. He said there's things they don't want to alter or change from the original, and there are things that they do, and that there's expectations when it comes to a remake of FF7. And one of those is Aerith's death. Regardless of what you think or feel. Regardless if that's your favorite fucking character you wanted to live. Like, it is an expectation. It's something that absolutely needs to happen, regardless of what you think on that. Aerith has to die. That's a major part of the story. Again, maybe the most major part of the story is Aerith's fate, right? In some aspects. There's no guarantee that we defeat Sephiroth without Aerith dying, right? Because she is able to pray for Holy, and it does activate the materia, right? But we learn once we get to the North Crater towards the end of the game that Sephiroth is, like, containing Holy, right? He's able to prevent it from helping stop Meteor. And if Aerith isn't dead inside the planet to will the live stream to come out and help Holy defeat Meteor, the world gets fucking annihilated. But also when it comes to the FF7 story and like the core themes of the game, it is life but also death, right? Death is a part of life. That's just what existence is, right? And they knew pretty early on in development that they wanted to kill somebody off in FF7. They went through different stages of who or what that would be. There was a time when it was every fucking buddy on the team dies except Cloud, right? I think maybe it's like your party lives and everybody else dies. Like you pick Cloud and like 2 other characters and everybody else dies. Something along those lines, right? But inevitably, they landed on the death of Aerith. That is a major decision they made when developing Final Fantasy VII, is to kill off the character of Aerith. And her death has meaning, too. It's not just tragedy. There can be beauty in it, especially with the remake games where it seems like she does have like future knowledge. And maybe she is aware that she's supposed to die in that moment. We don't know that yet, I suppose. But if she is intentionally kind of sacrificing herself to save the planet, to save her friends, like there is beauty in that. Then we're kind of rambling here, but we're talking about, aspects of the original game that they did want to change, that they didn't want to change, right, with this interview with Hamaguchi. And for me, like, the fate of Aerith is just one of those moments in gaming history that you can't change that. You can do it in a different way, which is what it seems like they're doing post-Rebirth, right, the end of Rebirth. But you can't change it. She can't just live, dude. And like, what's the story after that? If she's just alive in the third game and we defeat Sephiroth and everybody's alive and there's no bad things in the world, like what are we what's the message exactly? I don't know. Whatever. Now, with the team working on the third entry, the director thinks that players will be interested in knowing what's going to happen with Meteor, for example, as well as the overall conclusion. When asked if retaining player interest was a motivation for the boldest changes to the story, Hamaguchi said that it's hard to describe it as is, rather it was about ensuring success. The key for this project to succeed is to determine what kind of change we'd want to bring in order to sustain player interest throughout the remake trilogy. Without determining where we want to change some things up in terms of the story, it's kind of hard to ensure that the project succeeds, not just Remake and Rebirth, but the entire remake trilogy. So we're sort of trying to push boundaries in that sense and trying to figure out what kind of bold changes we can bring to the story, but we're also trying to make careful decisions around that. For the first part we read, where Hamaguchi talks about like player interest in what's happening with Meteor for the third game, I guess. I mean, it's there to a certain degree, but also it's FF7, so we know what's supposed to happen. But we didn't even really get to the Meteor stuff that much at all in the second game. Like, I know I'd seen a theory some time ago about like Sephiroth wanted to do the FF7 shit again, Meteor, win the planet, all that stuff, but also with like the multiverse concept of that, how all these other worlds would have their own live streams. So maybe on like a multiversal scale, Sephiroth wants to absorb the live stream from all these different worlds, and that's a little bit interesting. I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of the theory because I don't know how one meteor strike in this one world would allow him access to all the live streams from the other worlds, because if it's a multiverse, they're their own existence, right? They've existed for billions and billions of years prior to the events of FF7, right? So like it doesn't, unless he can drop Meteor into all the other universes somehow, some way, I don't know. Like it doesn't really make a lot of sense, but the idea is at least there. It's kind of interesting. My theory that I've had for the last couple of years now is that we're doing FF7 again, Meteor striking the planet, but the difference is they're bringing in the lore from the compilation, right? And based on the lore from the compilation, Omega exists. And the way Omega works is that when the world's in danger, he like activates, summons, whatever, and he's supposed to absorb all the live stream into himself and then fly off into the space and dump that live stream on another planet at some point or whatever. That's what's supposed to happen. So based on the lore of the compilation, like his ass should have been activated during the events of FF7, because the meteor is about to destroy the whole fucking world, right? Like, so you almost can't ignore that. Like, it has to be a part of Part 3. Like, how do you do Meteor about to destroy the planet? I mean, it comes in contact with goddamn Midgar, more or less. Like, how does Omega not activate? They've already touched on aspects of Dirge Cerberus with Vice and Nero being episode intermission, right? So we know deep ground stuff exists, and other aspects of Dirge Cerberus exist in the lore of the remake games. Unless you just retcon and like Omega's not a thing for some reason, you lose all the lore for Chaos as well for Vincent, which would be fucking stupid. So there's got to be Omega in Part 3 is my whole point. So like that's what I think's happened with Meteor potentially in the next game. So here we have the Den of Geek interview. Hamaguchi says, of all things that we reimagined with Final Fantasy VII Remake Trilogy, the Hell House boss battle is something that I'm really proud of. During the development, we didn't actually envision having the Hell House fight be a boss battle. It was actually just going to be a mob enemy in the field, much like the original. But when I saw the design of Hell House, I was like, why is a house just roaming around in the fields? It just didn't make sense to me. So I made an executive decision that this could be a weapon of Don Corneo's and could be a boss fight. So we've definitely heard some sort of aspect of this quote before. I don't know if I knew or we knew that it was Hamaguchi who made that decision, which I think speaks to his like creativeness as a director, because it's such an iconic random enemy from the original game. But it would be weird in the remake sense with how the world looks, the realism of the world, if we were fighting Hell House all the time in random encounters around the world, like Sector 5 slums, Sector 6 slums, or whatever. It just wouldn't work. It makes way more sense as a boss fight. I think it could maybe work if it was like a smaller enemy, right? But when you put it to scale with more or less like what a house looks like it would be weird as a random encounter, right? So like I think it just makes sense that it's a boss fight. So here's the bit from the Easy Allies interview. Naoki Hamaguchi says they won't use the exact same FF7 Remake battle system in future games, but they may use it as a basis to evolve upon and create something new and surprising. I think it is very possible for me to take the FF7 Remake battle system as a basis, have something that derives from that as an evolution. I think there's a possibility to use something like that, but I don't think I'll use the exact same format. Yeah, I definitely think you can use like the remake combat as like a baseline for another game. You can do like the action RPG stuff. You can even do the ATB system because that is just a part of Final Fantasy's DNA. You can have like even the menu pop up where you pick your attacks and stuff like that and time can slow down. You can do all that shit. You can just do kind of everything else differently and whatever the game might be. Like, obviously, a non-Final Fantasy VII game wouldn't have the materia system, which is a major part of the combat when it comes to FF7 Remake, right? You also like character progression, character skills, weapon abilities, if that is a thing in the next game that he's doing or whatever. Like, those can all be very, very different, of course. And like, you can do things very, very differently with whatever the next game might be, but keep, like, the core of the combat system similar to the remake games. Because it'd be kind of a shame for them to go through the effort of creating this incredible combat through Remake to Rebirth to the third game and just dropping it, like not using it for something else. Like, again, it can be quite different. You don't have to do the exact same thing, but also wouldn't hate it because I love the combat in the remake game. So if I was playing another game that just had similar combat, very similar combat, I wouldn't be disappointed. That is pretty much the video, my dudes. Kind of a lighter news video, if you want to call it that, right? We've kind of gone through a lot of interviews here lately, so we're starting to sort of see the same stuff said a little bit. It is still kind of exciting, though, just because we're talking about the remake project. We got the devs, specifically the director of the games, kind of talking about Part 3 a little bit, at least information for Part 3 in the somewhat near future. Kind of biding our time now, waiting on that inevitable announcement for Part 3, whatever that might be, whenever that might be. Probably Game Awards. Anyways, that's the video. Subscribe to if you guys are new, social networks in the description below. Follow me on Twitter, @DaveYT. That's it. Bye.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Low Gain or leave it like Cobain.